Imagine your sister vanishes one night after a party. No phone call, no trace, nothing. For 5 years, her name lingered in whispers. Parents warned their kids not to walk alone at night. Detectives chased leads that dissolved into nothing. Friends who once swore they knew her best eventually moved on, their loyalty fading under the weight of time. Then, out of nowhere, she walks into a courtroom, alive. But what she's about to reveal isn't just about her survival. It's about betrayal, corruption, and a truth no one ever expected. And if you stay with me through the story, you'll uncover not just how Rachel vanished, but what really happened in those missing years. You'll see the dark truths about power, trust, and betrayal that often hide in plain sight. And in the end, you'll understand why her reappearance didn't just close a case. It opened a wound in an entire community. Because here's the thing, when someone vanishes, people assume tragedy. But sometimes, the real story is even more complicated than death. Before Rachel Torres became a mystery, she was a story everyone thought they already knew. At 22, Rachel was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room. Not because she was loud or flashy, but because she carried herself with a quiet confidence. Dark curls that never seemed to stay pinned back, a quick laugh that made strangers feel like old friends, and a stubborn streak her parents swore would one day get her into trouble. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood of Decatur, Georgia, the oldest of 3 siblings. Her father, Miguel, drove trucks across the South. Her mother, Teresa, juggled 2 jobs. One as a school custodian, another cleaning houses, to keep the lights on. Money was tight, but Rachel dreamed big anyway. She wanted law school, maybe a career fighting for people who didn't have a voice. Rachel was never the type to settle, her best friend Jasmine once said. If she wanted something, she chased it. And that's what made her disappearance so devastating. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't the kind of girl who vanished into the night without a trace. The night of the party wasn't supposed to be special. Just another weekend blowout at an off-campus house, the kind college kids flocked to for cheap beer and loud music. Rachel almost didn't go. She had a paper due, and she wasn't much of a partier. But Jasmine had begged, and Rachel, ever loyal, agreed. No one could have known that decision would fracture 5 years of lives. Because the morning after the party, Rachel's bed was still made. Her textbooks sat neatly on her desk. Her phone, strangely, was powered off, something she never did. And by the time the sun had fully risen, it was clear something was wrong. What made it worse? Authorities didn't take it seriously at first. College kids disappear all the time, one officer told Rachel's mother. She'll turn up, probably just needed space. But Rachel never turned up, and the silence grew heavier with every passing day. The night Rachel Torres vanished began like any other college Friday in Atlanta. Music pulsed from a worn-down rental house just off campus, its porch crowded with students clutching red plastic cups. Laughter spilled into the street, the kind that said exams could wait until Monday. Rachel and Jasmine arrived just after 10 p.m. Jasmine was the social one, tugging Rachel inside with promises of just one drink. Rachel laughed, shaking her head, but followed anyway. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, spilled beer, and cologne too strong for the small living room. Strangers brushed past them, shouting greetings over the blaring bass. Witnesses later recalled Rachel that night. Dark jeans, a green top, her curls pulled back. Some remembered her by the way she smiled politely when she wasn't sure what else to do. Others remembered her sitting on the couch, nursing a single drink, watching Jasmine dance. But around 11:30 p.m., something shifted. Jasmine said Rachel stepped outside to make a call. I thought nothing of it, Jasmine would later tell investigators. She wasn't gone long, maybe 5 minutes. When she came back, she looked distracted, like something was on her mind. A few people remembered seeing Rachel near the kitchen, talking to a man no one recognized. Tall, mid-20s, wearing a gray hoodie, his face, frustratingly, blurred in every memory. By midnight, Jasmine was ready to leave. She searched for Rachel, but couldn't find her in the chaos. Assuming her friend had already called a ride home, something Rachel often did when she was done for the night. Jasmine left. The next morning, Rachel's bed was untouched. Her phone, normally buzzing with texts, sat silent. Teresa, her mother, knew instantly. Something was very wrong. When Rachel didn't show up for her Saturday shift at a local bookstore, alarms went off. She never missed work. Never. By Saturday afternoon, Teresa filed a missing person report. That's when the frustration began. "She's probably with a boyfriend," an officer said. "Maybe she wanted a break. She's an adult. She can leave if she wants." But Teresa refused to accept it. She gathered Rachel's friends, plastered flyers across campus, and begged the media to cover her daughter's story. The first week passed in a blur of false leads and dead ends. A security camera near the party house caught a blurry figure walking away around 12:40 a.m. The right height, the right build. But the footage was grainy. Investigators couldn't confirm it was Rachel. As days stretched into weeks, the search grew colder. Jasmine carried a crushing guilt. "If I had stayed with her, if I hadn't left," she whispered in an interview years later. Rachel's family, meanwhile, lived in a suspended state of grief. Her little brother, Daniel, stopped sleeping in his room, curling up on the couch instead, waiting for his sister to walk through the door. And then came the rumors, whispers that Rachel had run off, that she had a secret life no one knew about, each one a dagger to her family's already bleeding hope. But Teresa never stopped believing. "My daughter didn't just vanish," she said firmly. "Someone knows what happened to her." And she was right. Someone did. By the end of the first year, Rachel Torres's name had slipped out of headlines and into whispers. What started as nightly news reports became occasional mentions, tucked between weather updates and city council meetings. For her family, though, the silence was unbearable. Teresa still called her daughter's phone every morning before work, just to hear the voicemail. Daniel, only 15 when Rachel vanished, grew quiet, withdrawn, carrying anger he couldn't name. The Atlanta PD had no shortage of theories. One detective believed Rachel had left voluntarily, maybe with the man in the gray hoodie. Another insisted it was a case of trafficking, a crime that too often swallowed young women without a trace. But evidence was thin and leads dried up. Boxes of files stacked in the precinct's back room told the story. Dozens of interviews, grainy surveillance photos, witness statements that contradicted one another. The case was quietly marked cold. But Teresa didn't stop. She became her daughter's fiercest advocate. She started a Facebook group called Find Rachel Torres, which grew into thousands of followers across the country. She called local radio stations, begging them to remind listeners of her daughter's face. "Every day without her is a fight," she said in one interview, her voice trembling. "But I will not let the world forget my child." Years passed. Jasmine graduated college and carried her guilt like a shadow. She avoided parties, avoided music that reminded her of that night. Sometimes, in her dreams, she saw Rachel standing in the kitchen again, smiling faintly, about to say something, and then she'd wake up before the words came. The case had one flare of hope in year 3. A hiker in rural Georgia reported finding a woman's shoe and a bracelet engraved with the letter R. Investigators swarmed the area, cadaver dogs sniffing every inch, but nothing else was found. Rachel's father, Miguel, who had once lived apart from the family, returned during that search. He had always been a quiet man, a construction worker with rough hands, but that week he fell to his knees in the dirt, clutching the bracelet, whispering, "Please, God, let her come home." The bracelet was analyzed. No DNA, no connection, another dead end. By year 4, even Rachel's closest friends started moving on reluctantly. Weddings, careers, children, life demanded attention. But for Teresa, life stopped on March 14th, the day her daughter disappeared. Every anniversary, she lit a candle in the living room window, telling the neighbors, "She's still out there." And then, just as the 5th year approached, something shifted. A call came in from a neighboring county. A public defender, preparing a case for an unrelated client, had stumbled across a name in discovery. A man, once arrested near the college party house, linked to a string of assaults. He matched the description of the gray hoodie. It was enough to crack open old wounds and old files. Detectives reopened Rachel's case. But no one, not even Teresa, could have imagined what would happen next. Because 5 years after she vanished, Rachel Torres didn't just become a case file again. She walked into a courtroom alive, and the world that had given up on her suddenly demanded to know. Where had she been? It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning no one expects their life to change. Judge Hernandez's courtroom was in session, filled with lawyers, clerks, and a handful of observers waiting for a routine arraignment. The buzz of shuffling papers, the squeak of courtroom benches, and the low murmur of attorneys filled the air. And then the doors at the back opened. A woman stepped in, thin, pale, her hair longer but unkempt. Her shoulders squared as if she was holding herself together by sheer willpower. She wore a plain navy dress, wrinkled but clean. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning, landing on the judge. "Your Honor," her voice cracked, but it carried. "My name is Rachel Torres. I was reported missing 5 years ago." Gasps filled the courtroom. A clerk dropped his pen. Someone whispered, "No, it can't be." Judge Hernandez froze, staring over his glasses. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice a mixture of authority and disbelief. Rachel swallowed hard. "I've been gone a long time, but I'm here now, and I need to tell the truth." News spread like fire. Within an hour, journalists were outside the courthouse. Within a day, every network in Atlanta had a breaking news banner. "Missing woman returns after 5 years. Rachel Torres alive." Teresa nearly collapsed when she got the call. She dropped the mug she was holding, coffee splashing across the kitchen floor. For years she had prayed, begged, pleaded to see her daughter's face again. Now suddenly, impossibly, Rachel was alive. That night, when mother and daughter reunited at the precinct, cameras caught Teresa clutching Rachel's face, whispering over and over, "I knew it. I knew you'd come home." Rachel clung to her, trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom. I wanted to, but I couldn't. I couldn't." And that one sentence was enough to open the floodgates of questions. Where had she been? Why hadn't she come home? Who had kept her away? The police, the public, even her own family wanted answers. But Rachel wasn't ready, not yet. All she said, as cameras flashed in her face, was this: "They thought I was gone forever, but I wasn't. And I'm ready to tell the court everything." The stage was set. The girl who had vanished into the shadows was now at the center of a storm. And her testimony would expose not only the man in the gray hoodie, but an entire network of secrets buried deep in her city. The courtroom was silent the day Rachel Torres took the stand. For weeks, reporters had speculated, neighbors had whispered, and social media had buzzed with theories. Some people thought she'd run away. Others believed she had faked her disappearance. A few whispered darker rumors, that she'd been sold, trapped, or worse. Now, finally, the truth was about to break free. Rachel sat in the witness chair, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes steady. She glanced at her mother in the front row. Teresa gave her a small nod, tears glistening. Rachel took a deep breath. "The night of the party," she began. "I wasn't supposed to be there. I almost didn't go. But my friends begged me, said it would be fun. I thought, what's the worst that could happen?" Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "After midnight, I stepped outside to get some air. That's when I saw him, the man in the gray hoodie. I didn't recognize him, but he acted like he knew me. He said my name. I thought maybe he was a friend of a friend. I laughed it off, until he grabbed my arm." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rachel's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edges of the chair. "I tried to scream. He covered my mouth. He dragged me behind the house. I kicked. I scratched. But no one heard me over the music." She paused, her breathing shaky. "They put me in a van. Not just him, there were 2 others. I remember the smell of cigarettes and gasoline. They blindfolded me. When I woke up, I was in a room with no windows." The jury sat frozen. Even the court stenographer had stopped typing. staring in shock until the judge cleared his throat. Rachel continued, voice shaking. For 5 years, I was moved from place to place. Abandoned warehouses, a basement apartment. Sometimes I was alone for days. Sometimes I wasn't. She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. The silence in the room spoke volumes. Rachel wiped her eyes, her tone sharpening. But here's what they didn't know. I remembered things. A street sign I glimpsed under my blindfold. A scar on one man's wrist. The sound of a train nearby. I kept it all in my head. Every detail. I knew one day I'd get out, and when I did, I'd bring them down. The prosecutor leaned forward. Rachel, why now? How did you escape? Rachel looked straight at the jury. Because one of them got careless. He left the door unlocked. He thought I was too broken to try. But I wasn't. I ran, I found a phone, and I called the one number I remembered by heart, my mom's. Teresa sobbed in the front row. Rachel straightened her back, her voice fierce now. They thought I was weak. They thought no one would believe me. But I'm here. I survived. And I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbling furiously, jurors wide-eyed. The judge pounding his gavel for order. And in that moment, Rachel Torres wasn't just the girl who vanished. She was the woman who came back to tell the world the truth. Rachel's testimony had already gripped the courtroom. But what came next shattered every expectation. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the defense table where the 3 men accused of her abduction sat. 2 avoided her gaze, their lawyers whispering frantically. But the third, Daniel Rowe, stared at her with a smug half-smile, as if daring her to speak his name. Rachel's voice wavered at first, but then grew stronger. Yes, those men took me, but they weren't working alone. The entire courtroom went still. The prosecutor blinked. Rachel, are you saying there were others involved? Rachel nodded slowly. Yes, someone else was behind it all. Someone who knew me, knew where I'd be that night, knew my routines. The air grew thick, anticipation hanging like a storm cloud. Rachel's gaze shifted, past the defense table, past the jury, until it landed on a man sitting near the back of the room. A man in a suit, his arms folded tightly across his chest. The judge frowned. Miss Torres, do you need to clarify who you're referring to? Rachel swallowed hard. It was Officer Greg Miller. The words hit like a thunderclap. Reporters nearly dropped their pens. Jurors glanced at one another in disbelief. Teresa gasped so loudly the whole room heard. Officer Miller? The prosecutor repeated, stunned. The officer who was first assigned to your missing person case? Rachel's hands trembled, but her voice sharpened like steel. Yes, he wasn't just investigating my disappearance. He orchestrated it. He knew every move the police were making. That's how they always stayed one step ahead. He was the one who called me kiddo. He was there the first night. I heard his voice. The defense attorneys jumped to their feet, shouting objections. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order, but the chaos was unstoppable. In the back of the courtroom, Officer Miller stood slowly, his face pale. For the first time, Rachel saw fear in his eyes. The prosecutor turned, pointing. Your Honor, in light of this revelation, we request Officer Miller be taken into custody immediately pending investigation. The bailiffs moved, but Miller bolted. For a tense moment, it seemed he might make it to the doors, but 2 deputies tackled him to the ground. The courtroom erupted in screams, shouts, and the clicking of cameras as Miller was cuffed and dragged out, thrashing and yelling his innocence. Rachel sat frozen, her chest heaving. She had said it. She had named him, and now the world knew. The prosecutor placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Rachel, you just changed everything. The courtroom was no longer just a trial, it was a battlefield. With Officer Miller in custody, the entire case shifted. The prosecutor wasted no time weaving Rachel's shocking testimony into the broader narrative. The abduction wasn't random. It had been orchestrated by someone inside law enforcement. Someone sworn to protect her. The defense scrambled, insisting Rachel's memories were unreliable. But their voices grew weaker as new evidence surfaced. Phone records, financial transfers, even hidden surveillance footage Miller thought was erased. Every piece lined up like dominoes. Rachel sat quietly, hands clenched in her lap, as the puzzle of her suffering came together for everyone to see. When the jury left to deliberate, the tension was unbearable. Teresa gripped her sister's hand. "No matter what happens, you've already won. You spoke your truth." Hours later, the jurors filed back in. The foreman stood, voice steady. "On the charges of abduction, trafficking, and conspiracy, we find the defendants guilty." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, tears, cheers from Rachel's supporters. Teresa threw her arms around her sister as Rachel finally allowed herself to sob. Not in fear this time, but in release. But the most shocking moment came next. The judge looked toward Officer Miller, now in shackles, awaiting his separate trial. "And let it be known," the judge said firmly, "that betrayal from those entrusted with justice will be met with the harshest judgment this court can deliver." Rachel lifted her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Justice? After 5 years, the world outside the courthouse exploded with headlines, debates, and outrage. Rachel wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor who exposed corruption at its core. Her courage had rewritten her story, and her voice had changed everything. Sparkles, and that's where Rachel's journey in this chapter ends. Justice served, the truth revealed, and her voice finally heard. Now, I want to hear from you. Thought Balloon, do you think Officer Miller acted alone? Or was there an even bigger cover-up waiting to be uncovered? Backhand index pointing down, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story shook you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories of survival and justice.